Section 0 of the story of King Arthur and his Knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. Foreword. After several years of contemplation and of thought upon the matter herein contained, it has at last come about, by the grace of God, that I have been able to write this work with such pleasure of spirit that, if it gives to you but a part of the joy that it hath afforded me, I shall be very well content with what I have done. For when, in pursuing this history, I have come to consider the high nobility of spirit that moved these excellent men to act as they did, I have felt that they have afforded such a perfect example of courage and humility that anyone might do exceedingly well to follow after their manner of behavior in such measure as he is able to do. For I believe that King Arthur was the most honorable, gentle knight who ever lived in all the world, and those who were his fellows of the Round Table, taking him as their looking-glass of chivalry, made altogether such a company of noble knights that it is hardly to be supposed that their like will ever be seen again in this world. Wherefore it is that I have had such extraordinary pleasure in beholding how those famous knights behaved whenever circumstances called upon them to perform their endeavor. So, in the year of grace 1902, I began to write this history of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and, if I am able so to do, I shall endeavor, with love of that task, to finish the same at some other time in another book, and to the satisfaction of whosoever may care to read the story thereof. End of section 0. Section 1 of the Story of King Arthur and His Knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. The Book of King Arthur. Prologue. In ancient days there lived a very noble king named Uther Pendragon, and he became overlord of all of Britain. This king was very greatly aided unto the achievement of the Pendragonship of the realm by the help of two men who rendered him great assistance in all that he did. The one of these men was a certain very powerful enchanter and sometime prophet, known to men as Merlin the Wise, and he gave very good counsel unto Uther Pendragon. The other man was an excellent noble and renowned knight, hight Ulfius, who was thought by many to be the greatest leader in war of any man then alive, and he gave Uther Pendragon aid and advice in battle. So, with the help of Merlin and Sir Ulfius, Uther Pendragon was able to overcome all of his enemies and become king of the entire realm. After Uther Pendragon had ruled his kingdom for a number of years, he took to wife a certain beautiful and gentle lady hight Igraine. This noble dame was the widow of Gerlois, the Duke of Tintagel, by which prince she had two daughters, one of whom was named Margais and the other Morgana le Fay. And Morgana le Fay was a famous sorceress. These daughters the Queen brought with her to the court of Uther Pendragon after she had married that puissant king, and there Margais was wedded to King Urien of Gore, and Morgana le Fay was wedded to King Lot of Orkney. Now after a while Uther Pendragon and Queen Igraine had a son born unto them, and he was very beautiful and of great size and strength of bone. And whilst the child still lay wrapped in his swaddling clothes and lying in a cradle of gold and ultramarine, Merlin came to Uther Pendragon with a spirit of prophecy strong upon him, for such was often the case with him. And speaking in that spirit of prophecy, he said, Lord, it is given unto me to foresee that thou shalt shortly fall sick of a fever, and that thou shalt maybe die of a violent sweat that will follow thereon. Now, should such a dolorous thing befall us all, this young child, who is certes the hope of all this realm, will be in very great danger of his life. For many enemies will assuredly rise up with design to seize upon him for the sake of his inheritance, and either he will be slain, or else he will be held in captivity, from which he shall hardly hope to escape. Wherefore I do beseech thee, Lord, that thou wilt permit Sir Ulfius and myself to presently convey the child away unto some place of safe refuge, where he may be hidden in secret until he groweth to manhood and is able to guard himself from such dangers as may threaten him." When Merlin had made an end of speaking thus, Uther Pendragon made reply with a very steadfast countenance in this wise: "Merlin, so far as my death is concerned, when my time cometh to die, I believe God will give me grace to meet my end with entire cheerfulness. For, certes, my lot is in that wise no different from that of any other man who hath been born of woman. But touching the matter of this young child, if thy prophecy be true, then his danger is very great, and it would be well that he should be conveyed hence to some place of safe harborage as thou dost advise. Wherefore I pray thee to perform thy will in this affair, bearing in thy heart the consideration that the child is the most precious inheritance which I shall leave unto this land." All this, as was said, Uther Pendragon spake with great calmness and equanimity of spirit. And Merlin did as he had advised, and he and Sir Ulfius conveyed the child away by night, and no one but they wist whither the babe had been taken. And shortly afterward Uther Pendragon was seized with the sickness as Merlin had foretold, and he died exactly as Merlin had feared that he would die. Wherefore it was very well that the child had been taken to a place of safety. And after Uther Pendragon had departed from this life, it was likewise as Merlin had feared, for all the realm fell into great disorder. For each lesser king contended against his fellow for overlordship, and wicked knights and barons harried the highways as they listed, and there levied toll with great cruelty upon helpless wayfarers. For some such travellers they took prisoners and held for ransom, whilst others they slew because they had no ransom to pay. So it was a very common sight to see a dead man lying by the roadside if you should venture to make a journey upon some business or other. Thus it befell that after a while all that dolorous land groaned with the trouble that lay upon it. Thus there passed nearly 18 years in such great affliction. And then one day the Archbishop of Canterbury summoned Merlin to him, and bespake him in this wise: "Merlin, men say that thou art the wisest man in all the world. Canst thou not find some means to heal the distractions of this woeful realm? Bend thou thy wisdom to this matter, and choose thou a king who shall be a fit overlord for us, so that we may enjoy happiness of life once more, as we did in the days of Uther Pendragon." Then Merlin lifted up his countenance upon the Archbishop and spake in this wise: "My lord, the spirit of prophecy that lieth upon me sometimes moveth me now to say that I do perceive that this country is soon to have a king who shall be wiser and greater and more worthy of praise than was even Uther Pendragon. And he shall bring order and peace, where is now disorder and war. Moreover, I may tell you that this king shall be of Uther Pendragon's own full blood royal." To this the Archbishop said, "What thou tellest me, Merlin, is a wonderfully strange thing. But in this spirit of prophecy canst thou not foretell when this king is to come? And canst thou tell how we shall know him when he appeareth amongst us? For many lesser kings there are who would fain be overlord of this land, and many such there are who deem themselves fit to rule over all the others. How then shall we know the real king from those who may proclaim themselves to be the rightful king?" "My lord Archbishop," quoth Merlin, "if I have thy leave for to exert my magic, I shall set an adventure which if any man achieve it, all the world shall straightway know that he is the rightful king and overlord of this realm." And to this the Archbishop said, "Merlin, I bid thee do whatsoever may seem to thee to be right in this affair." And Merlin said, "I will do so." So Merlin caused by magic that a huge marble stone, 4 square, should suddenly appear in an open place before the cathedral door. And upon this block of marble he caused it to be that there should stand an anvil, and into the anvil he caused it that there should be thrust a great naked sword midway deep of the blade. And this sword was the most wonderful that any man had ever seen, for the blade was of blue steel and extraordinarily bright and glistering. And the hilt was of gold, chased and carved with marvellous cunning, and inlaid with a great number of precious stones, so that it shone with wonderful brightness in the sunlight. And about the sword were written these words in letters of gold: "Whoso pulleth out this sword from the anvil, that same is rightwise king born of England." So a great many people came and gazed upon that sword and marvelled at it exceedingly, for its like had never before been beheld upon the earth. Then, when Merlin had accomplished this miracle, he bade the Archbishop to call together all the chief people of that land upon Christmas tide. And he bade the Archbishop to command that every man should make assay to draw up the sword, for that he who should succeed in drawing it forth out of the anvil should be rightwise King of Britain. So the Archbishop did according as Merlin said. And this was the marvel of the marble stone and the anvil, of which same anyone may easily read for himself in that book written a very long while ago by Robert de Boron, which is called Les Romans de Merlin. Now when the mandate of the Lord Archbishop went forth, summoning all the chief people of the land to the assay of that miracle, for indeed it was a miracle to draw forth a sword blade out of an anvil of solid iron, all the realm became immediately cast into a great ferment, so that each man asked his fellow, "Who shall draw forth that sword, and who shall be our king?" Some thought it would be King Lot, and others thought it would be King Urien of Gore, these being the sons-in-law unto Uther Pendragon. Some thought that it would be King Leodegrance of Cameliard, and others that it would be King Rience of North Wales. Some thought it would be this king, and others that it would be that king. For all the world was divided into different parties, who thought according to their liking. Then, as Christmas tide drew nigh, it presently appeared as though the entire world was wending its way to London town, for the highways and the byways became filled with wayfarers, kings and lords and knights and ladies and esquires and pages and men-at-arms, all betaking their way whither the assay was to be made of that adventure of the sword and the anvil. Every inn and castle was filled so full of travellers that it was a marvel how so many folk could be contained within their compass, and everywhere were tents and pavilions pitched along the wayside for the accommodation of those who could not find shelter within doors. But when the Archbishop beheld the multitudes that were assembling, he said to Merlin, "Indeed, Merlin, it would be a very singular thing if among all these great kings and noble honorable lords we should not find some one worthy of being the king of this realm." Unto which the Merlin smiled and said, "Marvel not, my lord, if among all those who appear to be so extraordinarily worthy there shall not be found one who is worthy. And marvel not if, among all those who are unknown, there shall arise one who shall approve himself to be entirely worthy." And the Archbishop pondered Merlin's words, and so beginneth this story. End of section 1.
Section 2 of the Story of King Arthur and His Knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joe Sela. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. Part 1. The Winning of Kinghood. Here beginneth the story of the sword, the anvil, and the marble stone, and of how that sword was first achieved by an unknown youth, until then of no renown, whether in arms or of estate. So hearken unto that which I have hereinafter written. Chapter first. How Sir Kay did combat in a great tournament at London town, and of how he brake his sword, likewise how Arthur found a new sword for him. It happened that among those worthies who were summoned unto London town by the mandate of the Archbishop, as above recounted, there was a certain knight, very honorable and of high estate, by name Sir Ector of Bonmaison, surnamed the Trustworthy Knight, because of the fidelity with which he kept the counsel of those who confided in him, and because he always performed unto all men, whether of high or low degree, that which he promised to undertake, without defalcation as to the same. So this noble and excellent knight was held in great regard by all those who knew him, for not only was he thus honorable in conduct, but he was, besides, of very high estate, being possessed of 7 castles in Wales, and in the adjoining country north thereof, and likewise of certain fruitful tracts of land, with villages appertaining thereunto, and also of sundry forests of great extent, both in the north country and the west. This very noble knight had 2 sons. The elder of these was Sir Kay, a young knight of great valor and promise, and already well renowned in the courts of chivalry, because of several very honorable deeds of worthy achievement in arms which he had performed. The other was a young lad of 18 years of age, by name Arthur, who at that time was serving very good repute as Sir Kay's esquire at arms. Now when Sir Ector of Bonmaison received by messenger the mandate of the Archbishop, he immediately summoned these 2 sons unto him, and bade them to prepare straightway for to go with him to London town, and they did so. And in the same manner he bade a great number of retainers and esquires and pages for to make them ready, and they likewise did so. Thus, with a very considerable array at arms, and with great show of circumstance, Sir Ector of Bonmaison betook his way unto London town in obedience to the commands of the Archbishop. So when he had come thither, he took up his inn in a certain field where many other noble knights and puissant lords had already established themselves, and there he set up a very fair pavilion of green silk, and erected his banner emblazoned with the device of his house, to wit, a griffin, black upon a field of green. And upon this field were a great multitude of other pavilions of many different colors, and over above each pavilion was the pennant and the banner of that puissant lord to whom the pavilion belonged. Wherefore, because of the multitude of these pendants and banners, the sky was at places well nigh hidden with the gaudy colors of the fluttering flags. Among the great lords who had come thither in pursuance to the Archbishop's summons were many very famous kings and queens and noblemen of high degree. For there was King Lot of Orkney, who had taken to wife a stepdaughter of Uther Pendragon, and there was King Ironsoft Gore, who had taken to wife another stepdaughter of that great king. And there was King Ban, and King Bors, and King Griantz, and King Leodegrance, and many others of like degree, for there was no less than 12 kings and 7 dukes, so that, what with their court of lords and ladies and esquires and pages in attendance, the town of London had hardly ever seen the like before that day. Now the Archbishop of Canterbury, having in mind the extraordinary state of the occasion that had brought so many kings and dukes and high lords unto that adventure of the sword and the anvil, had commanded that there should be a very stately and noble tournament proclaimed. Likewise he commanded that this contest at arms should be held in certain field nigh to the great cathedral, 3 days before that assay should be made of the sword and the anvil, which same was to be undertaken, as aforesaid, upon Christmas Day. To this tournament were bidden all knights who were of sufficient birth, condition, and quality for to fit them to take part therein. Accordingly, very many exalted knights made application for admission, and that in such numbers that 3 heralds were kept very busy looking into their pretensions unto the right of the battle. For these heralds examined the escutcheons and the rolls of lineage of all applicants with great care and circumspection. Now when Sir Kay received news of this tournament, he went to where his father was, and when he stood before his face, he spake in this wise: Sire, being thy son, and of such very high condition, both as to birth and estate, as I have inherited from thee, I find that I have an extraordinary desire to imperil my body in this attend the tourney. Accordingly, if so be I may approve my quality as to knighthood before this college of heralds, it will maybe be to thy great honor and credit, and to the honor and credit of our house, if I should undertake this adventure. Wherefore I do crave thy leave to do as I have a mind. Unto these Sir Ector made reply: My son, thou hast my leave for to enter this honorable contest, and I do hope that God will give thee a great deal of strength, and likewise such grace of spirit that thou mayst achieve honor to thyself and credit to us who are of thy blood. So Sir Kay departed with very great joy, and immediately went to that congress of heralds, and submitted his pretensions unto them. And after they had duly examined into his claim to knighthood, they entered his name as knight contestant according to his desire. And at this Sir Kay was filled with great content and joy of heart. So when his name had been enrolled upon the list of combatants, Sir Kay chose his younger brother Arthur for to be his esquire at arms, and to carry his spear and pennant before him into the field of battle. And Arthur was also made exceedingly glad because of the honor that had befallen him and his brother. Now the day having arrived when this tourney was to be held, a very huge concourse of people gathered together to witness that noble and courtly assault at arms. For at that time London was, as aforesaid, extraordinarily full of nobility and knighthood, wherefore it was reckoned that not less than 20,000 lords and ladies, besides those 12 kings in their courts and 7 dukes in their courts, were assembled in the list circumadjacent to the field of battle for to witness the performance of those chosen knights. And those noble people sat so close together, and so filled the seats and benches assigned to them, that it appeared as though an entirely solid wall of human souls surrounded that meadow where the battle was to be fought. And indeed, any knight might well be moved to do his uttermost upon such a great occasion, with the eyes of so many beautiful dames and noble lords gazing upon his performances. Wherefore the hearts of all knights attendant were greatly expanded with emulation to overturn their enemies into the dust. In the center of this wonderful court of lords and ladies there was erected the stall and the throne of the Lord Archbishop himself. Above the throne was a canopy of purple cloth emblazoned with silver lilies, and the throne itself was hung all about with purple cloth of velvet, embroidered alternately with the figure of St. George in gold, and with silver crosses of St. George surrounded by golden halos. Here the Lord Archbishop himself sat in great estate and pomp, being surrounded by a very exalted court of clerks of high degree, and also of knights of honorable estate, so that all that center of the field glistened with the splendor of gold and silver embroidery, and was made beautiful by various colors of rich apparel, and bright with fine armor of excellent workmanship. And indeed, such was the stateliness of all these circumstances, that very few who were there had ever seen so noble a preparation for battle as that which they then beheld. Now, when all that great assembly were in their places and everything had been prepared in due wise, an herald came and stood forth before the installed throne of the Archbishop, and blew a very strong, loud blast upon the trumpet. At that signal the turnpikes of the lists were immediately opened, and the 2 parties of knights contestant entered therein, the one party at the northern extremity of the meadow of battle, and the other party at the southern extremity thereof. Then immediately all that lone field was aglitter with the bright shining splendor of the sunlight upon polished armor and accoutrements. So these 2 parties took up their station, each at such a place that had been assigned unto them, the one to the north and the other to the south. Now the party with which Sir Kay had cast his lot was at the north end of the field, and that company was 80 in number, and the other party stood at the south end of the field, and the company was 16 in number. But though the party with whom Sir Kay had attached himself numbered less by 3 than the other party, yet was it the stronger by some degree, because that there were a number of knights of great strength and renown in that company. Indeed, it may be here mentioned that 2 of those knights afterward became companions in very good credit of the Round Table, to wit, Sir Mador de la Porte and Sir Bedivere, which later was the last who saw King Arthur alive upon this earth. So when all was prepared according to the ordination of the tournament, and when those knights contestants had made themselves ready in all ways that was necessary, and when they had dressed their spears and their shields in such a manner as befitted knights about to enter serious battle, the herald set his trumpet to his lips a second time, and blew upon it with might and main. Then having sounded this blast, he waited for a while, and then he blew upon the trumpet again. And upon that blast each of those parties of knights quitted its station and rushed forth in a great tumult against the other party, and that with such noise and fury that the whole earth groaned beneath the feet of the war horses, and trembled and shook as with an earthquake. So those 2 companies met, the one against the other, in the midst of the field, and the roar of breaking lances was so terrible that those who heard it were astonished and appalled at the sound. For several fair dames swooned away with terror of the noise, and others shrieked aloud, for not only was there a great uproar, but the air was altogether filled with the splinters of ash wood that flew about. In that famous assault 80 very noble and honorable knights were overthrown, many of them being trampled beneath the hoofs of their horses. Wherefore, when the 2 companies withdrew in retreat, each to his station, the ground was beheld to be covered all over with broken fragments of lances and with cantels of armor, and many knights were seen to be woefully lying in the midst of all that wreck. And some of these champions strove to arise and could not, while others lay altogether quiet as though in death. To these ran divers, esquires, and pages in great numbers, and lifted up the fallen men and bare them away to places of safe harborage. And likewise attendants ran and gathered up the cantels of armor and the broken spears, and bare them away to the barriers, so that by and by the field was altogether cleared once more. Then all those who gazed down upon that meadow gave loud acclaim with great joyousness of heart, for such a noble and glorious contest at arms in friendly assay had hardly ever beheld in that realm before. End of Section 2. Recording by Joe Sela.
Section 3 of the Story of King Arthur and His Knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. The Book of King Arthur, Part 1. The Winning of Kinghood. Chapter 1st, Part 2. Now we turn unto Sir Kay. For in this assault he had conducted himself with such credit that no knight who was there had done better than he, and maybe no one had done so well as he. For, though two opponents at once had directed their spears against him, yet he had successfully resisted their assault. And one of those two he smote so violently in the midst of his defences that he had lifted that assailant entirely over the crupper of the horse which he rode, and had flung him down to the distance of half a spear's length behind his steed, so that the fallen knight had rolled thrice over in the dust ere he ceased to fall. And when those of Sir Kay's party who were nigh to him beheld what he did, they gave him loud and vehement acclaim, and that in such measure that Sir Kay was wonderfully well satisfied and pleased at heart. And indeed it is to be said that at that time there was hardly any knight in all the world who was so excellent in deeds of arms as Sir Kay. And though there afterward came knights of much greater renown and of more glorious achievement, as shall be hereinafter recorded in good season, yet at that time Sir Kay was reckoned by many to be one of the most wonderfully puissant knights, whether errant or in battle, in all of that realm. So was that course of the combat run to the great pleasure and satisfaction of all who beheld it, and more especially of Sir Kay and his friends. And after it had been completed, the two parties in array returned each to its assigned station once more. And when they had come there, each knight delivered up his spear unto his esquire. For the assault which was next to be made was to be undertaken with swords, wherefore all lances and other weapons were to be put away, such being the order of that courteous and gentle bout at arms. Accordingly, when the herald again blew upon his trumpet, each knight drew his weapon with such readiness for battle that there was a great splendor of blades all flashing in the air at once. And when the herald blew a second time, each party pushed forward to the contest with great nobleness of heart and eagerness of spirit, every knight being moved with intent to engage his opponent with all the might and main that lay in him. Then immediately began so fierce a battle that if those knights had been very enemies of long standing instead of friendly contestants, the blows which they delivered the one upon the other could not have been more vehement as to strength or more astonishing to gaze upon. And in this affair likewise Sir Kay approved himself to be so extraordinary a champion that his like was nowhere to be seen in all that field, for he violently smote down 5 knights, the one after the other, ere he was stayed in his advance. Wherefore, beholding him to be doing work of such a sort, several of the knights of the other party endeavored to come at him with intent to meet him in his advance. Amongst these was a certain knight, hight Sir Balamorgineas, who was so huge of frame that he rode head and shoulders above any other knight. And he was possessed of such extraordinary strength that it was believed that he could successfully withstand the assault of 3 ordinary knights at one time. Wherefore, when this knight beheld the work that Sir Kay did, he cried out to him, "Ho, ho, Sir Knight of the Black Gryphon, turn thou hitherward and do a battle with me." Now when Sir Kay beheld Sir Balamorgineas to be minded to come against him in that wise, very threateningly, and minded to do him battle, he turned him toward his enemy with great cheerfulness of spirit. For at that time Sir Kay was very full of youthful fire, and reckoned nothing of assaulting any enemy who might demand battle of him. So it was at that time. But it after befell, when he became seneschal, and when other and mightier knights appeared at the court of the king, that he would sometimes avoid an encounter with such a knight as Sir Launcelot, or Sir Pellias, or Sir Marhaus, or Sir Gawaine, if he might do so with credit to his honor. So, being very full of the spirit of youth, he turned him with great lustiness of heart, altogether inflamed with the eagerness and fury of battle. And he cried out in a great voice, "Very well, I will do battle with thee, and I will cast thee down like thy fellows." And therewith he smote with wonderful fierceness at Sir Balamorgineas, and that with all his might. And Sir Balamorgineas received the stroke upon his helmet and was altogether bewildered by the fury thereof, for he had never felt its like before that time. Wherefore his brains swam so light that it was necessary for him to hold to the horn of his saddle to save himself from falling. But it was a great pity for Sir Kay that, with the fierceness of the blow, his sword blade snapped short at the haft, flying so high in the air that it appeared to overtop the turrets of the cathedral in its flight. Yet so it happened, and thus it befell, that Sir Kay was left without any weapon. Yet it was thought that, because of that stroke, he had Sir Balamorgineas entirely at his mercy, and that if he could have struck another blow with his sword, he might easily have overcome him. But as it was, Sir Balamorgineas presently so far recovered himself that he perceived his enemy to be altogether at his mercy. Wherefore, being filled beyond measure with rage because of the blow he had received, he pushed against Sir Kay with intent to smite him down in a violent assault. In this pass it would maybe have gone very ill with Sir Kay, but that three of his companions in arms, perceiving the extreme peril in which he lay, thrust in betwixt him and Sir Balamorgineas with intent to take upon themselves the assault of that knight, and so to save Sir Kay from overthrow. This they did with such success that Sir Kay was able to push out from the press and to escape to the barriers without suffering any further harm at the hands of his enemies. Now when he reached the barrier, his esquire, young Arthur, came running to him with a goblet of spiced wine. And Sir Kay opened the umbril of his helmet for to drink, for he was athirst beyond measure. And lo, his face was all covered over with blood and sweat, and he was so adrout with battle that his tongue clave to the roof of his mouth, and he could not speak. But when he had drunk of the draught that Arthur gave him, his tongue was loosened, and he cried out to the young man in a loud and violent voice, "Ho, ho, brother, get me another sword for to do battle, for I am assuredly winning for our house much glory this day." And Arthur said, "Where shall I get thee a sword?" And Kay said, "Make haste unto our father's pavilion, and fetch me thence another sword, for this which I have is broken." And Arthur said, "I will do so with all speed." And thereupon he set hand to the barrier and leaped over it into the alleyway beyond. And he ran down the alleyway with all the speed that he was able with intent to fulfill that task which his brother had bidden him to undertake. And with like speed he ran to that pavilion that his father had set up in the meadows. But when he came to the pavilion of Sir Ector, he found no one there, for all the attendants had betaken themselves unto the tournament, and neither could he find any sword fit for his brother's handling, wherefore he was put to a great pass to know what to do in that matter. In this extremity he bethought him of that sword that stood thrust into the anvil before the cathedral, and it appeared to him that such a sword as that would suit his brother's purposes very well. Wherefore he said to himself, "I will go thither and get that sword if I am able to do so, for it will assuredly do very well for my brother for to finish his battle withal." Whereupon he ran with all speed to the cathedral. And when he had come there, he discovered that no one was there upon guard at the block of marble, as had heretofore been the case, for all who had been upon guard had betaken themselves unto the contest of arms that was toward. And the anvil and the sword stood where he could reach them. So, there being no one to stay young Arthur, he leaped up upon the block of marble and laid his hands unto the hilt of the sword. And he bent his body and drew upon the sword very strongly, and lo, it came forth from the anvil with wonderful smoothness and ease, and he held the sword in his hand, and it was his. And when he had got the sword in that way, he wrapped it in his cloak so that no one might see it, for it shone with an exceeding brightness and splendor, and he leaped down from the block of marble stone and hastened with it unto the field of battle. Now when Arthur had entered into that meadow once more, he found Sir Kay awaiting his coming with great impatience of spirit. And when Sir Kay saw him, he cried out very vehemently, "Hast thou got a sword?" And Arthur said, "Yea, I have one here." Thereupon he opened his cloak and showed Sir Kay what sword it was he had brought. Now when Sir Kay beheld the sword, he immediately knew it, and he wist not what to think or what to say. Wherefore he stood for a while like one turned into a stone, looking upon that sword. Then in a while he said in a very strange voice, "Where got ye that sword?" And Arthur looked upon his brother, and he beheld that his countenance was greatly disturbed, and that his face was altogether as white as wax. And he said, Brother, what ails thee that thou lookest so strangely? I will tell the entire truth. I could find no sword in our father's pavilion, wherefore I bethought me of that sword that stood in the anvil upon the marble cube before the cathedral. So I went thither and made assay for to draw it forth, and it came forth with wonderful ease. So when I had drawn it out, I wrapped it in my cloak, and brought it hither unto thee, as thou beholdest." Then Sir Kay turned his thoughts inward, and communed with himself in this wise: "Lo, my brother Arthur is as yet hardly more than a child, and he is moreover exceedingly innocent. Therefore he knoweth not what he hath done in this, nor what the doing thereof signifieth. Now since he hath achieved this weapon, why should I not myself lay claim to that achievement, and so obtain the glory which it signifieth?" Whereupon he presently aroused himself, and he said to Arthur, "Give the sword and the cloak to me." And Arthur did as his brother commanded. And when he had done so, Sir Kay said to him, "Tell no man of this, but keep it privy in thine own heart. Meantime go thou to our father where he sits at the lists, and bid come straightway unto the pavilion where we have taken up our inn." And Arthur did as Sir Kay commanded him, greatly possessed with wonder that his brother should be so disturbed in spirit as he had appeared to be. For he wist not what he had done in drawing out that sword from the anvil, nor did he know of what great things should arise from that little thing. For so it is in this world that a man sometimes approves himself to be worthy of such a great trust as that, and yet, in lowliness of spirit, he is yet altogether unaware that he is worthy thereof. And so it was with young Arthur at that time. End of section 3.
Section 4 of The Story of King Arthur and His Knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Warren Cotty, Gurnee, Illinois. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. Part 1. The Winning of Kinghood. Chapter 2nd. Chapter 2nd. How Arthur twice performed the miracle of the sword before Sir Ector, and how his birthright was discovered unto him. So Arthur made haste to that part of the lists where Sir Ector sat with the people of his household. And he stood before his father and said, "Sire, my brother Kay hath sent me hitherward for to bid thee come straightway unto the pavilion where we have taken up our inn. And truly I think something very extraordinary hath befallen, for my brother Kay hath such a countenance as I never saw him wear." Then Sir Ector marveled very greatly what it was that should cause Sir Kay to quit that battle and to summon him at such a time. Wherefore he arose from where he sat and went with Arthur. And they went to the pavilion, and when he had come there, behold, Sir Kay was standing in the midst of the pavilion. And Sir Ector saw that his face was as white as ashes of wood, and that his eyes shone with a wonderful brightness. And Sir Ector said, "My son, what ails thee?" Whereunto Sir Kay made reply, "Sire, here is a very wonderful matter." Therewith he took his father by the hand and brought him to the table that stood in the pavilion. And upon the table there lay a cloak, and there was something within the cloak. Then Sir Kay opened the cloak, and lo! there lay the sword of the anvil, and the hilt thereof, and the blade thereof glistered with exceeding splendor. And Sir Ector immediately knew that sword and whence it came. Wherefore he was filled with such astonishment that he wist not what to do. And for a while his tongue refused to speak. And after a while he found speech and cried out aloud in a great voice, "What is this that mine eyes behold?" To this Sir Kay made reply, "Sire, I have that sword which stood a while since embedded in the anvil that stands upon the cube of marble stone before the great cathedral. Wherefore I demand that thou tellest me what this may portend." Then Sir Ector said, "How came you by that sword?" And for a while Sir Kay was silent, but after a while he said, Sire, I brake my sword in that battle which of late I fought, whereupon I found me this sword in its stead. Then Sir Ector was altogether bemazed, and knew not whether to believe what his ears heard. And after a while he said, If so be that thou didst draw forth this sword from the anvil, then it must also be that thou art rightwise King of Britain, for so the saying of the sword proclaimeth. But if thou didst indeed draw it forth from the anvil, then it will be that thou shalt as easily be able for to thrust it back again into that place from whence thou didst take it. At this a great trouble of spirit fell upon Sir Kay, and he cried out in a very loud voice, Who may do such a thing as that, and who could perform so great a miracle as to thrust a sword into solid iron? Whereunto Sir Ector made reply, Such a miracle is no greater than the miracle that thou hast performed in drawing it out from its embedment. For who ever heard that a man could draw forth a sword from a place, and yet would not thrust it back whence he drew it? Then Sir Kay wist not what to say to his father, and he greatly feared that he should not be able to perform that miracle. But, nevertheless, he took what comfort to himself he was able, saying, If my young brother Arthur was able to perform this miracle, why should I not do a miracle of a like sort? For, assuredly, I am not less worthy than he. Wherefore, if he drew the sword forth with such ease, it may be that I with equal ease shall be able to thrust it back into its place again. Accordingly, he took such comfort to himself in these thoughts as he was able. So he wrapped the sword in the cloak again, and when he had done so, he and Sir Ector went forth from the pavilion and betook their way unto where was the marble stone and the anvil before the cathedral. And Arthur went with his father and his brother, and they forbade him not. And when they had come to that place where the sword had been, Sir Kay mounted upon the cube of marble stone and beheld the face of the anvil. And lo, the face of the anvil was altogether smooth and without a scratch or scar of any sort. And Sir Kay said to himself, What is this my father would have me do? What man is there in life who could thrust a sword blade into a solid anvil of iron? But, nonetheless, he could not withdraw from that impossible undertaking, but was constrained to essay that miracle. Wherefore he set the point of the sword to the iron and bore upon it with all his strength. But it was impossible for him to accomplish that thing, and though he endeavored with all his might with the sword against the face of the anvil, yet he did not pierce the iron even to the breadth of a hair. So, after he had essayed for a great while, he at last ceased what he did and came down from where he stood. And he said to his father, Sire, no man in life may perform that miracle. Unto this Sir Ector made reply, How is it possible then that thou couldst have drawn out that sword as thou sayest, and yet cannot put it back again? Then young Arthur lifted up his voice and said, My father, have I thy leave to speak? And Sir Ector said, Speak, my son. And Arthur said, I would that I might essay to handle that sword. Whereunto Sir Ector replied, By what authority wouldst thou handle that sword? And Arthur said, Because it was I who drew that sword forth from the anvil for my brother. Wherefore, as thou sayest, to draw it forth is not more difficult than to thrust it back again. So I believe that I shall be able to set it back into the iron whence I drew it. Then Sir Ector gazed upon young Arthur in such a strange manner that Arthur wist not why he looked at him in that wise. Wherefore he cried out, Sire, why dost thou gaze so strangely upon me? Hast thou anger against me? Whereunto Sir Ector made reply, In the sight of God, my son, I have no anger against thee. Then he said, If thou hast a desire to handle the sword, thou mayest assuredly make essay of that miracle. So Arthur took the sword from his brother Kay, and he leaped up upon the marble stone, and he set the point of the sword upon the anvil, and bare very strongly upon it, and lo, the sword penetrated very smoothly into the center of the anvil until it stood midway deep therein, and there it stood fast. And after he had performed that miracle, he drew the sword forth again very swiftly and easily, and he thrust it back again once more as he had done before. But when Sir Ector beheld what Arthur did, he cried out in a voice of exceeding loudness, Lord, Lord, what is the miracle mine eyes behold? And when Arthur came down from the cube of marble stone, Sir Ector kneeled down before him and set his hands together, palm to palm. But when Arthur beheld what his father did, he cried out aloud like one in a great measure of pain, and he said, my father, why dost thou kneel down to me? To him Sir Ector made reply, I am not thy father, and now it is made manifest that thou art assuredly of very exalted race, and that the blood of kings flows in thy veins, else thou couldst not have handled that sword as thou hast done. Then Arthur fell a-weeping beyond all measure, and he cried out as with great agony of spirit, Father, father, what is this thou sayest? I beseech thee to arise, and not to kneel unto me. So Sir Ector arose from his knees and stood before the face of Arthur, and he said, Arthur, why dost thou weep? And Arthur said, Because I am afeard. Now all this while Sir Kay had stood near by, and he could neither move nor speak, but stood like one entranced. And he said to himself, What is this? Is my brother a king? Then Sir Ector spake, saying, Arthur, the time hath come for thee to know thyself, for the true circumstances of thy life have, heretofore, been altogether hidden from thee. Now I do confess everything to thee in this wise, that 18 years ago there came to me a certain man very wise and high in favor with Uther Pendragon, and that man was the enchanter Merlin. And Merlin showed me the signet ring of Uther Pendragon, and he commanded me by virtue of that ring that I should be at a certain assigned place at a particular time which he nominated. And the place which he assigned was the postern gate of Uther Pendragon's castle, and the time which he named was midnight of that very day. And he bade me tell no man aught concerning those things which he communicated to me, and so I kept his counsel as he desired me to do. So I went to that postern gate at midnight as Merlin had commanded, and at that place there came unto me Merlin and another man, and the other man was Sir Ulfius, who was the chief knight of Uther Pendragon's household. And I tell thee that these two worthies stood nigher unto Uther Pendragon than any other men in all of the world. Now when those two came unto me, I perceived that Merlin bare in his arms a certain thing wrapped in a scarlet mantle of fine texture. And he opened the folds of the mantle, and lo, I beheld a child not long born and wrapped in swaddling clothes. And I saw the child in the light of a lanthorn which Sir Ulfius bare, and I perceived that he was very fair of face and large of bone, and thou wert that child. Then Merlin commanded me in this wise, that I was to take that child, and that I should rear him as mine own. And he said that the child was to be called by the name of Arthur. And he said that no one in all the world was to know otherwise than that the child was mine own. And I told Merlin that I would do as he would have me, whereupon I took the child and bare it away with me. And I proclaimed that the child was mine own, and all over the world believed my words, wherefore no one ever knew otherwise than that thou wert mine own son. And that lady who was my wife, when she died, she took that secret with her unto paradise. And since then until now, no one in all the world knew aught of this matter but I and those two aforementioned worthies. Nor have I until now ever known aught of who was thy father. But now I do suspect who he was, and that thou hast in thy veins very high and kingly blood. And I do have in mind that perhaps thy father was Uther Pendragon himself, for who but the son of Uther Pendragon could have drawn forth that sword from out of the anvil as thou hast done? Then, when Arthur heard that saying of his father's, he cried out in a very loud and vehement voice, Woe, 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 saying that word 3 times. And Sir Ector said, Arthur, why art thou woeful? And Arthur said, Because I've lost my father, for I would rather have my father than be a king. Now as these things passed, there came unto that place 2 men, very tall and of a wonderfully noble and haughty appearance. And when these 2 men had come nigh to where they were, Arthur and Sir Ector and Sir Kay perceived that one of them was the enchanter Merlin, and that the other was Sir Ulfius. For those 2 men were very famous and well known unto all the world. And when those 2 had come to where were the 3, Merlin spake, saying, What cheer? And Sir Ector made answer, Here is cheer of a very wonderful sort, for behold, Merlin, this is that child that thou didst bring unto me 18 years ago, and lo, thou seest he hath grown into manhood. Then Merlin said, Sir Ector, I know very well who is this youth, for I have kept diligent watch over him for all this time, and I know that in him lieth the hope of Britain. Moreover, I tell thee that even today within the surface of an enchanted looking-glass I have beheld all that he hath done since the morning. And I know how he drew forth the sword from the anvil, and how he thrust it back again. And I know how he drew it forth and thrust it back a 2nd time. And I know all that thou hast been saying unto him this while. Wherefore I also do now avouch that thou hast told him the very truth. And lo, the spirit of prophecy is upon me, and I do foresee into the future that thou, Arthur, shall become the greatest and most famous king that ever lived in Britain. And I do foresee that many knights of extraordinary excellence shall gather about thee, and that men shall tell of their marvelous deeds as long as this land shall continue. And I do foresee that through these knights thy reign shall be full of splendor and glory. And I do foresee that the most marvelous adventure of the Holy Grail shall be achieved by 3 of the knights of thy court, and that to thy lasting renown who shall be the king under whose reign the Holy Cup shall be achieved. All these things I foresee, and lo, the time is now at hand when the glory of thy house shall again be made manifest unto the world, and all the people of this land shall rejoice in thee and thy kinghood. Wherefore, Sir Ector, for these 3 days to come, I do charge it upon thee, that thou do guard this young man as the apple of thine eye, for in him doth lie the hope and salvation of all this realm. Then Sir Ector lifted up his voice and cried unto Arthur, A boon, a boon! And Arthur said, Alas, how is this? Dost thou, my father, ask a boon of me, who may have all in the world that is mine to give? Ask what thou wilt, and it is thine. Then Sir Ector said, I do beseech this of thee, that when thou art king thy brother Kay may be seneschal of all this realm. And Arthur said, It shall be as thou dost ask. And he said, As for thee, it shall be still better with thee, for thou shalt be my father unto the end. Whereupon, so saying, he took Sir Ector's head into his hands, and he kissed Sir Ector upon the forehead and upon the cheeks, and so sealed his plighted word. But all this while Sir Kay had stood like unto one struck by thunder, and he wist not whether to be uplifted unto the skies, or to be cast down into the depths, that his young brother should have been passed by him and exalted unto that extraordinary altitude of fortune. Wherefore he stood like to one bereft of life and motion. And let it here be said that Arthur fulfilled all that he had thus promised to his father, for in after times he made Sir Kay his seneschal, and Sir Ector was to him a father unto the day of his death, which same befell 5 years from that time. Thus I have told you how the royalty of Arthur was first discovered, and now, if you will listen, ye shall hear how it was confirmed before all the world. End of section 4. Recording by Warren Cotty, Gurnee, Illinois. Section 5 of The Story of King Arthur and His Knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Warren Cotty, Gurnee, Illinois. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. Part 1. The Winning of Kinghood. Chapter 3rd. Chapter 3rd. How several kings and high dukes essayed to draw the sword out of the anvil, and how they failed. Likewise, how Arthur made the essay and succeeded therein. So when the morning of Christmas Day had come, many thousands of folk of all qualities, both gentle and simple, gathered together in front of the cathedral for to behold the essay of that sword. Now there had been a canopy of embroidered cloth of divers colors spread above the sword and the anvil, and a platform had been built around the cube of marble stone. And nigh unto that place there had been a throne for the archbishop established. For the archbishop was to overlook that essay, and to see that every circumstance was fulfilled with due equity and circumspection. So when the morning was half gone by, the archbishop himself came with great pomp of estate, and took his seat upon the high throne that had been placed for him, and all his court of clerks and knights gathered about him, so that he presented a very proud and excellent appearance of courtliness. Now unto that assay there had gathered 19 kings and 16 dukes, and each of these was of such noble and exalted estate that he entertained high hopes that he would that day be approved before the world to be the right king and overlord of all Britain. Wherefore, after the archbishop had established himself upon his throne, there came several of these and made demand that he should straightway put that matter to the test. So the archbishop commanded his herald for to sound a trumpet, and to bid all who had the right to make essay of the sword to come unto that adventure, and the herald did according as the archbishop ordered. And when the herald had sounded his trumpet, there immediately appeared the first of those kings to make trial of the sword, and he who came was King Lot of Orkney and the Isles. With King Lot there came 11 knights and 5 esquires, so that he appeared in very noble estate before the eyes of all. And when King Lot had arrived at that place, he mounted the platform. And first he saluted the archbishop, and then he laid his hands to the pommel of the sword in the sight of all. And he bent his body and drew upon the sword with great strength, but he could not move the blade in the anvil even so much as the breadth of a hair, for it stood as fast as the iron in which it was planted. And after that first essay he tried 3 times more, but still he was altogether unable to move the blade in the iron. Then, after he had thus 4 times made essay, he ceased his endeavor and came down from that place. And he was filled with great anger and indignation that he had not succeeded in his endeavor. And after King Lot there came his brother-in-law, King Urien of Gore, and he also made essay in the same wise as King Lot had done. But neither did he succeed any better than that other king. And after King Urien there came King Fion of Scotland, and after King Fion there came King Mark of Cornwall, and after King Mark there came King Rience of North Wales, and after King Rience there came King Leodegrance of Camelard, and after him came all those other kings and dukes before enumerated, and not one of all these was able to move the blade. And some of these high and mighty lords were filled with anger and indignation that they had not succeeded, and others were ashamed that they had failed in that undertaking before the eyes of all those who looked upon them. But whether they were angry or whether they were ashamed, it in no wise helped their case. Now, when all the kings and dukes had thus failed in that adventure, the people who were there were very much astonished, and they said to one another, "How is this? If all those kings and dukes of very exalted estate have failed to achieve that adventure, who then may hope to succeed? For here have been all those who were most worthy of that high honor, and all have tried to draw that sword, and all have failed. Who then is there now to come after these who may hope to succeed? And likewise those kings and dukes spoke together in the same manner. And by there came 6 of the most worthy, to wit, King Lot, King Urien, King Pellinore, King Bain, King Rience, and Duke Clarence of Northumberland. And these stood before the throne of the Archbishop, and spake to him in this wise: Sir, here have all the kings and dukes of this realm striven before you for to draw forth that sword, and lo, not one of all those who have undertaken that thing hath succeeded in his undertaking. What then may we understand but that the enchanter Merlin hath set this adventure for to bring shame and discredit upon all of us who are here, and upon you who are the head of the church in this realm? For who in all the world may hope to draw forth a sword blade out from a bed of solid iron? Behold, it is beyond the power of any man. Is it not then plain to be seen that Merlin hath made a mock of us all? Now, therefore, lest all this great congregation should have been called here in vain, we do beseech you of your wisdom that you presently choose the one from among the kings here gathered, who may be best fitted to be overlord of this realm. And when ye shall have chosen him, we will promise to obey him in all things whatsoever he may ordain. Verily, such a choice as that will be better worth while than to spend time in this foolish task of striving to draw forth a sword out of an anvil which no man in all the world may draw forth. Then was the Archbishop much troubled in spirit, for he said to himself, Can it be sooth that Merlin hath deceived me, and hath made a mock of me and of all these kings and lordly folk? Surely this cannot be, for Merlin is passing wise, and he would not make a mock of all the realm for the sake of so sorry a jest as this would be. Certes, he hath some intent in this of which we know not, being of less wisdom than he, wherefore I will be patient for a while longer. Accordingly, having communed thus with himself, he spake aloud in this wise to those 7 high lords. Messires, he said, I have yet faith that Merlin hath not deceived us, wherefore I pray your patience for one little while longer. For if in the time a man may count 500 twice over, no one cometh forward to perform this task, then will I, at your behest, proceed to choose one from amongst you, and will proclaim him king and overlord of all. For the Archbishop had faith that Merlin was about to immediately declare a king before them all. Now leave we these and turn we unto Arthur and his father and brother. For Merlin had bidden those 3 to abide in their pavilion until such time as he thought would be fit for them to come out thence. And that time being now come, Merlin and Sir Ulfius went to the pavilion of Sir Ector, and Merlin said, Arthur, arise and come forth, for now the hour is come for thee to assay before the whole world that miracle which thou didst of late execute in privacy. So Arthur did as Merlin bade him to do, and he came forth from the pavilion with his father and his brother, and lo, he was like one who walked in a dream. So they 5 went down from thence toward the cathedral and unto that place of assay. And when they had come to the congregation there assembled, the people made way for them, greatly marveling and saying to one another, Who are these with the enchanter Merlin and Sir Ulfius, and whence come they? For all the world knew Merlin and Sir Ulfius, and they wist that here was something very extraordinary about to happen. And Arthur was clad in all flame-colored raiment embroidered with threads of silver, so that others of the people said, Certes, that youth is very fair to look upon. Now who may he be? But Merlin said no word to any man, but he brought Arthur through the press into that place where the Archbishop sat, and the press made way for him so that he was not stayed in his going. And when the Archbishop beheld Merlin come thus with those others, he arose and said, Merlin, who are these whom thou bringest unto us, and what is their business here? And Merlin said, Lord, here is one come to make the assay of yonder sword. And the Archbishop said, Which one is he? And Merlin said, This is he, and he laid his hand upon Arthur. Then the Archbishop looked upon Arthur, and he beheld that the youth was very comely of face. Wherefore his heart went out unto Arthur, and he loved him a very great deal. And the Archbishop said, Merlin, by what right doth this young man come hither? And Merlin made reply, Lord, he cometh hither by the best right that there is in the world. For he who standeth before thee clad in red is the true son of Uther Pendragon and of his lawful wife, Queen Igraine. Then the Archbishop cried out aloud in great amazement, and those who stood nigh and who heard what Merlin said were so astonished that they wist not what to think. And the Archbishop said, Merlin, what is this that thou tellest me? For who, until now, in all the world hath ever heard that Uther Pendragon had a son? Unto this Merlin made reply, No one hath ever known of such a thing until now, only a very few. For it was in this wise. When this child was born, the spirit of prophecy lay upon me, and I foresaw that Uther Pendragon would die before a very great while. Wherefore I feared that the enemies of the king would lay violent hands upon the young child for the sake of his inheritance. So at the king's behest I and another took the young child from his mother, and gave him unto a third, and that man received the kingly child and maintained him ever since as his own son. And as to the truth of these things, there are others here who may attest the verity of them. For he who was with me when the young child was taken from his mother was Sir Ulfius, and he to whom he was entrusted was Sir Ector of Bonmaison. And those two witnesses, who are without any reproach, will avouch to the verity of that which I have asserted. For here they stand before thee to certify unto what I have said. And Sir Ulfius and Sir Ector said, All that Merlin hath spoken is true, and thereunto we do pledge our most faithful and sacred word of honor. Then the Archbishop said, Who is there may doubt the word of such honorable witnesses? And he looked upon Arthur and smiled upon him. Then Arthur said, Have I then thy leave, Lord, to handle yonder sword? And the Archbishop said, Thou hast my leave, and may the grace of God go with thee to do thy endeavor. Thereupon Arthur went to the cube of marble stone, and he laid his hands upon the haft of the sword that was thrust into the anvil. And he bent his body and drew very strongly, and lo, the sword came forth with great ease and very smoothly. And when he had got the sword into his hands, he swung it about his head so that it flashed like lightning. And after he had swung it thus thrice about his head, he set the point thereof against the face of the anvil, and bore upon it very strongly. And behold, the sword slid very smoothly back again into that place where it had aforetime stood. And when it was there, midway deep, it stood fast where it was. And thus did Arthur successfully accomplish that marvelous miracle of the sword in the eyes of all the world. Now, when the people who were congregated at that place beheld this miracle performed before their faces, they lifted up their voices all together, and shouted so vehemently and with so huge a tumult of outcry that it was as though the whole earth rocked and trembled with the sound of their shouting. And whiles they so shouted, Arthur took hold of the sword again, and drew it forth, and swung it again, and again drave it back into the anvil. And when he had done that, he drew it forth a third time, and did the same thing as before. Thus it was that all those who were there beheld that miracle performed 3 times over. And all the kings and dukes who were there were filled with great amazement, and they wist not what to think or to say when they beheld one, who was little more than a boy, perform that undertaking in which the best of them had failed. And some of them, seeing that miracle, were willing to acknowledge Arthur because of it, but others would not acknowledge him. These withdrew themselves and stood aloof. And as they stood thus apart, they said among themselves, What is this? And who can accredit such a thing that a beardless boy should be set before us all, and should be made king and overlord of this great realm for to govern us? Nay, nay, we will have none of him for our king. And others said, Is it not apparent that Merlin and Sir Ulfius are thus exalting this unknown boy so that they may elevate themselves along with him?" Thus these discontented kings spake among themselves. And of all of them the most bitter were King Lot and King Urien, who were brothers by marriage with Arthur. Now when the Archbishop perceived the discontent of these kings and dukes, he said to them, "How now, Messires? Are ye not satisfied?" And they said, "We are not satisfied." And the Archbishop said, "What would ye have?" And they said, "We would have another sort of king for Britain than a beardless boy of whom no one knoweth, and of whose birthright there are only 3 men to attest." And the Archbishop said, "What of that? Hath he not performed the miracle that ye yourselves essayed and failed to perform?" But these high and mighty lords would not be satisfied, but with angry and averted faces they went away from that place, filled with wrath and indignation. But others of these kings and dukes came and saluted Arthur and paid him court, giving him joy of that which he had achieved. And the chiefest of those who came thus unto him in friendliness was King Leodegrance of Cameliard. And all the multitude acknowledged him and crowded around that place, shouting so that it sounded like to the noise of thunder. Now all this while Sir Ector and Sir Kay had stood upon one side, and they were greatly weighed down by sorrow, for it appeared to them that Arthur had, of a sudden, been uplifted so far from their estate that they might never hope to approach him more. For now he was of kingly consequence, and they but common knights. And after a while Arthur beheld them where they stood with downcast looks, whereupon he straightway went to them, and took first one and then the other by the hand, and kissed each upon the cheek. Thereupon they were again very glad at being thus uplifted unto him. And when Arthur departed from that place, great crowds of people followed after him, so that the streets were altogether filled with the press of people. And the multitude continually gave him loud acclaim as the chosen King of England, and those who were nearest to him sought to touch the hem of his garments. Wherefore the heart of Arthur was exceedingly uplifted with great joy and gladness, so that his soul took wing and flew like a bird into the sky. Thus Arthur achieved the adventure of the sword that day, and entered into his birthright of royalty. Wherefore may God grant his grace unto you all, that ye too may likewise succeed in your undertakings. For any man may be a king in that life in which he is placed, if so be he may draw forth the sword of success from out of the iron of circumstance. Wherefore, when your time of assay cometh, I do hope it may be with you as it was with Arthur that day, and that ye too may achieve success with entire satisfaction unto yourself and to your great glory and perfect happiness. Amen. End of section 5. Recording by Warren Cotty, Gurnee, Illinois. Section 6 of The Story of King Arthur and His Knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Warren Cotty, Gurnee, Illinois. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. Part 1. The Winning of Kinghood. Conclusion. Now after these things had happened, there was much talk among men and great confusion and tumult. For while some of the kings and nearly all the multitude said, Lo, here is a king come to us, as it were, from out of heaven for to bring peace unto our distracted land. Yet other kings, and they were of greater number, said, Who is this beardless boy who cometh with a claim to be high king of Britain? Who ever heard of him before? We will have none of him except upon further trial and upon greater avouchment. So for the sake of peace the Archbishop ordained that another assay of the sword should be made at Candlemas. And here again all those who endeavored to draw forth the sword failed thereat, but Arthur drew it forth several times very easily in the sight of all. And after that a third trial was made at Easter, and after that a fourth trial was made at Pentecost. And at all these trials Arthur repeatedly drew out the sword from the anvil, and no one but he could draw it forth. And after that fourth trial, sundry of the kings and many of the lesser barons and knights, and all of the commons, cried out that these were trials enough, and that Arthur had assuredly approved himself to be right wise king. Wherefore they demanded that he should be made king indeed, so that he might rule over them. For it had come to pass that whithersoever Arthur went, great crowds followed after him, hailing him as the true son of Uther Pendragon and rightwise overlord of Britain. Wherefore the Archbishop, seeing how the people loved Arthur and how greatly they desired him for their king, ordained that he should be anointed and crowned unto royal estate. And so it was done at the great cathedral. And some say that the cathedral was St. Paul's, and some say that it was not. But when Arthur had thus been crowned, all those who were opposed unto his kingship withdrew themselves in great anger, and immediately set about to prepare war against him. But the people were with Arthur and joined with him, and so also did several kings and many of the lesser barons and knights. And with the advice of Merlin, Arthur made friends and allies of sundry other kings, and they and he fought 2 great wars with his enemies, and won both of these wars. And in the second war was fought a very famous battle nigh to the forest of Bedegraine, wherefore it was called the Battle of Bedegraine. And in that battle Arthur overthrew his enemies so entirely that it was not possible for them ever to hope to unite in war against him again. And of King Lot, his brother-in-law, King Arthur brought 2 of his sons to court for to dwell there and to serve as hostages of peace thereafter. And these 2 were Gawain and Gaheris, and they became, after a while, very famous and accomplished knights. And of King Urien, his other brother-in-law, Arthur brought unto court his one son Ewaine, for to hold as a hostage of peace, and he also became in time a very famous and accomplished knight. And because of these hostages there was peace thereafter betwixt these 3 kingly brothers for all time. And a certain very famous king and knight hight King Pellinore, who was one of his enemies, Arthur drove out of his possessions and away from the habitations of men and into the forest. And King Rience, who was another of his enemies, he drave into the mountains of North Wales. And other kings who were his enemies he subjugated to his will, so that all the land was at such peace that it had not enjoyed the like since the days of Uther Pendragon. And King Arthur made Sir Kay his seneschal, as he had promised to do, and he made Sir Ulfius his chamberlain, and Merlin he made his counselor, and Sir Bodwain of Britain he made his constable. And these men were all of such a sort as greatly enhanced the glory and renown of his reign, and established him upon his throne with entire security. Now when the reign of King Arthur became thus entirely established, and when the renown of his greatness began to be known in the world, many men of noble souls and of large spirit and of high knightly prowess, knights who desired above all things to achieve glory at arms in courts of chivalry, perceived that great credit and exaltation of estate were likely to be won under such a king. So it fell out that, from all parts, by little and little, there began to gather together such a court of noble, honorable knights about King Arthur as men never beheld before that time, and shall haply never behold again. For even to this day the history of these good knights is known to the greater part of mankind. Yea, the names of many kings and emperors have passed away and have been forgotten, but the names of Sir Galahad, and of Sir Launcelot of the Lake, and of Sir Tristram of Lyonesse, and of Sir Percival of Gales, and of Sir Gawain, and of Sir Ewaine, and of Sir Bors de Ganis, and of many others of that noble household of worthy brotherhood, is still remembered by men. Wherefore I think that it is very likely that so long as words shall be written, the performances of these worthies shall be remembered. So in this history yet to be written, I have set it for my task to inform him who reads this book of many of these adventures, telling him, besides, such several circumstances as I do not believe are known unto everybody. And by, when I shall tell of the establishment of the Round Table, I shall set forth a tabulated list of a number of those worthies who at this time assembled at the court of Arthur as men chosen to found that order of the Round Table, and who, for that reason, were entitled the ancient and honorable companions of the Round Table. For though this entire history chiefly concerneth King Arthur, yet the glory of these great honorable knights was his glory, and his glory was their glory. Wherefore one cannot tell of the glory of King Arthur without also telling of the glory of those noble gentlemen aforesaid. End of section 6. Recording by Warren Cotty, Gurnee, Illinois.
Section 7 of the Story of King Arthur and His Knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. The Book of King Arthur, Part 2. The Winning of a Sword. Chapter 1st, Part 1. Here beginneth the story of certain adventures of Arthur, after that he had become king, wherein it is told how, with great knightly courage and prowess, he fought a very fierce and bloody battle with a certain sable knight. Likewise it is told how he achieved, in consequence of that battle, a certain sword so famous and glorious that its renown shall last as long as our speech shall be spoken. For the like of that sword was never seen in all the world before that time, and it hath never been beheld since then, and its name was Excalibur. So, if it please you to read this story, I believe it will afford you excellent entertainment, and will without doubt greatly exalt your spirit because of the remarkable courage which these two famous and worthy knights displayed when they fought together that famous battle. Likewise you shall find great cheer in reading therein of the wonderful marvellousness of a certain land of faery into which King Arthur wandered, and where he found a lake of enchantment, and held converse with a mild and beautiful lady of that land, who directed him how to obtain that renowned sword aforementioned. For it hath given me such pleasure to write these things that my heart would at times be diluted as with a pure joy, wherefore I entertain great hopes that you also may find much pleasure in them as I have already done. So I pray you to listen unto what follows. Chapter 1st. How there came a certain wounded knight unto the court of King Arthur, how a young knight of the king's court sought to avenge him and failed, and how the king thereupon took that essay upon himself. Now it fell upon a certain pleasant time in the springtide season that King Arthur and his court were making a royal progression through that part of Britain which lieth close to the forest of the Usk. At that time the weather was exceedingly warm, and so the king and the court made pause within the forest under the trees in the cool and pleasant shade that the place afforded, and there the king rested for a while upon a couch of rushes spread with scarlet cloth. And the knights then present at the court were Sir Gawaine, and Sir Ewaine, and Sir Kay, and Sir Pellias, and Sir Bedivere, and Sir Caradoc, and Sir Geraint, and Sir Bodwin of Britain, and Sir Constantine of Cornwall, and Sir Brandiles, and Sir Mador de la Porte, and there was not to be found anywhere in the world a company of such noble and exalted knights as these. Now as the king lay drowsing, and as these worthies sat holding cheerful converse together at that place, there came of a sudden a considerable bustle and stir upon the outskirts of the court, and presently there appeared a very sad and woeful sight. For there came thitherward a knight sore wounded, and upheld upon his horse by a golden-haired page, clad in an apparel of white and azure. And likewise the knight's apparel and the trappings of his horse were of white and azure, and upon his shield he bore the emblazonment of a single lily flower of silver upon a ground of pure azure. But the knight was in a very woeful plight, for his face was as pale as wax and hung down upon his breast, and his eyes were glazed and saw naught that passed around him, and his fair apparel of white and blue was all red with the blood of life that ran from a great wound in his side. And as they came upon their way, the young page lamented in such wise that it wrung the heart for to hear him. Now as these approached, King Arthur aroused, cried out, Alas, what doleful spectacle is that which I behold! Now hasten ye, my lords, and bring succor to yonder knight, and do thou, Sir Kay, go quickly and bring that fair young page hither, that we may presently hear from his lips what mishap hath befallen his lord. So certain of those knights hastened at the King's bidding, and gave all succor to the wounded knight, and conveyed him to King Arthur's own pavilion, which had been pitched at a little distance. And when he had come there, the King's chirurgeon presently attended upon him, albeit his wounds were of such a sort he might not hope to live for a very long while. Meantime Sir Kay brought that fair young page before the King where he sat, and the King thought that he had hardly ever seen a more beautiful countenance. And the King said, I prithee tell me, Sir Page, who is thy master, and how came he in such a sad and pitiable condition as that which we have just now beheld? That will I so, Lord, said the youth. Know that my master is entitled Sir Miles of the White Fountain, and that he cometh from the country north of where we are, and at a considerable distance from this. In that country he is the lord of 7 castles and several noble estates, wherefore, as thou mayst see, he is of considerable consequence. A fortnight ago, being doubtless moved thereunto by the lustiness of the springtime, he set forth with only me for his esquire, for he had a mind to seek adventure in such manner as beseemed a good knight who would be errant. And we had several adventures, and in all of them my lord was entirely successful. For he overcame 6 knights at various places, and sent them all to his castle for to attest his valor unto his lady. At last, this morning, coming to a certain place situated at a considerable distance from this, we came upon a fair castle of the forest, which stood in a valley surrounded by open spaces of level lawn, bedight with many flowers of divers sorts. There we beheld 3 fair damsels who tossed a golden ball from one to another, and the damsels were clad all in flame-colored satin, and their hair was of the color of gold. And as we drew nigh to them, they stinted their play, and she who was the chief of those damsel called out to my lord, demanding of him whither he went, and what was his errand. To her my lord made answer that he was errant and in search of adventure. And upon this the 3 damsels laughed, and she who had first spoken said, An thou art in search of adventure, Sir Knight, haply I may be able to help thee to one that shall satisfy thee to thy heart's content. Unto this my master made reply, I prithee, fair damsel, tell me what that adventure may be, so that I may presently assay it. Thereupon this lady bade my master to take a certain path, and to follow the same for the distance of a league or a little more, and that he would then come to a bridge of stone that crossed a violent stream, and she assured him that there he might find adventure enough for to satisfy any man. So my master and I wended thitherward as that damoiselle had directed, and by we came unto the bridge whereof she had spoken. And lo, beyond the bridge was a lonesome castle with a tall straight tower, and before the castle was a wide and level lawn of well-trimmed grass. And immediately beyond the bridge was an apple tree hung over with a multitude of shields. And midway upon the bridge was a single shield entirely of black, and beside it hung a hammer of brass, and beneath the shield was written these words in letters of red, Whoso smiteth this shield doth so at his peril. Now my master, Sir Miles, when he read those words, went straightway to that shield, and seizing the hammer that hung beside it, he smote upon it a blow so that it rang like thunder. Thereupon, as an answer, the portcullis of the castle was let fall, and there immediately came forth a knight, clad all from head to foot in sable armor, and his apparel and the trappings of his horse and all the appointments thereof were likewise entirely of sable. Now when that sable knight perceived my master, he came riding swiftly across the meadow, and so to the other end of the bridge. And when he had come there, he drew rein and saluted my master and cried out, Sir Knight, I demand of thee why thou didst smite that shield. Now let me tell thee, because of thy boldness, I shall take away from thee thine own shield, and shall hang it upon yonder apple tree, where thou beholdest all those other shields to be hanging." Unto this my master made reply, "That thou shalt not do unless thou mayest overcome me as knight to knight." And thereupon immediately he dressed his shield and put himself into array for an assault at arms. So my master and this sable knight, having made themselves ready for that encounter, presently drave together with might and main, and they met in the middle of the course where my master's spear burst into splinters. But the spear of the sable knight held, and it pierced through Sir Miles his shield, and it penetrated his side, so that both he and his horse were overthrown violently into the dust, he being wounded so grievously that he could not arise again from the ground whereon he lay. Then the sable knight took my master's shield and hung it up in the branches of the apple tree where the other shields were hanging, and thereupon, without paying further heed to my master, or inquiring as to his hurt, he rode away into his castle again, whereof the portcullis was immediately closed behind him. So after that he had gone, I got my master to his horse with great labor, and straightway took him thence, not knowing where I might find harbridge for him until I came to this place. And that, my lord king, is the true story of how my master came by that mortal hurt which he hath suffered. "Ha! By the glory of paradise!" cried King Arthur. "I do consider it great shame that in my kingdom, and so near to my court, strangers should be so discourteously treated as Sir Miles hath been served. For it is certainly a discourtesy for to leave a fallen knight upon the ground without tarrying to inquire as to his hurt how grievous it may be, and still more discourteous is it for to take away the shield of a fallen knight who hath done good battle." And so did all the knights of the King's court exclaim against the discourtesy of that sable knight. Then there came forth a certain esquire attendant upon the King's person, by name Griflet, who was much beloved by his royal master, and he kneeled before the King and cried out in a loud voice, "I crave a boon of thee, my lord King, and do beseech thee that thou wilt grant it unto me." Then King Arthur uplifted his countenance upon the youth as he knelt before him, and he said, "Ask, Griflet, and thy boon shall be granted unto thee." Thereupon Griflet said, "It is this that I would ask. I crave that thou wilt make me straightway knight, and that thou wilt let me go forth and endeavor to punish this unkindly knight by overthrowing him and so redeeming those shields which he hath hung upon that apple tree." Then was King Arthur much troubled in his spirit, for Griflet was as yet only an esquire, and altogether untried in arms. So he said, "Behold, thou art yet too young to have to do with so potent a knight as this sable champion must be, who has thus overthrown so many knights without himself suffering any mishap. I prithee, dear Griflet, consider and ask some other boon." But young Griflet only cried the more, a boon, and thou hast granted it unto me." Thereupon King Arthur said, "Thou shalt have thy boon, though my heart much misgiveth me that thou wilt suffer great ill and misfortune from this adventure." So that night Griflet kept watch upon his armor in a chapel of the forest, and in the morning, having received the sacrament, he was created a knight by the hand of King Arthur, and it was not possible for any knight to have greater honor than that. Then King Arthur fastened the golden spurs to Sir Griflet's heels with his own hand. So Griflet was made a knight, and having mounted his charger, he rode straightway upon his adventure, much rejoicing and singing for pure pleasure. And it was at this time that Sir Miles died of his hurt. For it is often so that death and misfortune befall some, whiles others laugh and sing for hope and joy, as though such grievous things as sorrow and death could never happen in the world wherein they live. End of section 7. Section 8 of the story of King Arthur and his knights. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. The Book of King Arthur, Part 2. The Winning of a Sword. Chapter 1st, Part 2. Now that afternoon King Arthur sat waiting with great anxiety for word of that young knight, but there was no word until toward evening, when there came hurrying to him certain of his attendants, proclaiming that Sir Griflet was returning, but without his shield, and in such guise that it seemed as though a great misfortune had befallen him. And straightway thereafter came Sir Griflet himself, sustained upon his horse on the one hand by Sir Constantine, and upon the other by Sir Brandiles. And lo, Sir Griflet's head hung down upon his breast, and his fair new armor was all broken and stained with blood and dust, and so woful was he of appearance that King Arthur's heart was contracted with sorrow to behold that young knight in so pitiable a condition. So at King Arthur's bidding they conducted Sir Griflet to the royal pavilion, and there they laid him down upon a soft couch. Then the king's chirurgeon searched his wounds and found that the head of a spear and a part of the shaft thereof were still piercing Sir Griflet's side, so that he was in most woful and grievous pain. And when King Arthur beheld in what a parlous state Sir Griflet lay, he cried out, "Alas, my dear young knight, what hath happened thee to bring thee unto such a woful condition as this which I behold?" Then Sir Griflet, speaking in a very weak voice, told King Arthur how he had fared. And he said that he had proceeded through the forest until he had discovered the 3 beautiful damsels whereof the page of Sir Miles had spoken. And he said that these damsels had directed him as to the manner in which he should pursue his adventure. And he said that he had found the bridge whereon hung the shield and the brazen maul, and that he had there beheld the apple tree hung full of shields. And he said that he smote the shield of the Sable Knight with the brazen maul, and that the Sable Knight had thereupon come riding out against him. And he said that this knight did not appear of a mind to fight with him. Instead, he cried out to him with a great deal of nobleness that he was too young and too untried in arms to have to do with a seasoned knight. Wherefore he advised Sir Griflet to withdraw him from that adventure ere it was too late. But notwithstanding this advice, Sir Griflet would not withdraw, but declared that he would certainly have to do with that other knight in sable. Now at the very first onset Sir Griflet's spear had burst into pieces, but the spear of the Sable Knight had held and had pierced through Sir Griflet's shield and into his side, causing him this grievous wound whereof he suffered. And Sir Griflet said that the Sable Knight had then most courteously uplifted him upon his horse again, albeit he had kept Sir Griflet's shield and had hung it upon the tree with those others that hung there, and had then directed him upon his way, so that he had made shift to ride thither, though with great pain and dole. Then was King Arthur very woed and greatly disturbed in his mind, for indeed he loved Sir Griflet exceedingly well. Wherefore he declared that he himself would now go forth for to punish that Sable Knight, and for to humble him with his own hand. And though the knights of his court strove to dissuade him from that adventure, yet he declared that he with his own hand would accomplish that proud knight's humiliation, and that he would undertake the adventure with God his grace upon the very next day. And so disturbed was he that he could scarce eat his food that evening for vexation, nor would he go to his couch to sleep, but having inquired very narrowly of Sir Griflet where he might find that valley of flowers and those 3 damsels, he spent the night in walking up and down his pavilion, awaiting for the dawning of the day. Now as soon as the birds first began to chirp, and the east to brighten with the coming of the daylight, King Arthur summoned his 2 esquires, and having with their aid donned his armor and mounted a milk-white war horse, he presently took his departure upon that adventure which he had determined upon. And indeed it is a very pleasant thing for to ride forth in the dawning of a springtime day, for then the little birds do sing their sweetest song, all joining in one joyous medley, whereof one may scarce tell one note from another, so multitudinous is that pretty roundelay. Then do the growing things of the earth smell the sweetest in the freshness of the early daytime, the fair flowers, the shrubs, and the blossoms upon the trees. Then doth the dew bespangle all the sward, as with an incredible multitude of jewels of various colors. Then is all the world sweet and clean and new, as though it had been fresh created for him who came to roam abroad so early in the morning. So King Arthur's heart expanded with great joy, and he chanted a quaint song as he rode through the forest upon the quest of that knightly adventure. So about noontide he came to that part of the forest lands whereof he had heard those several times before. For of a sudden he discovered before him a wide and gently sloping valley, adown which ran a stream as bright as silver. And lo, the valley was strewn all over with an infinite multitude of fair and fragrant flowers of divers sorts, and in the midst of the valley there stood a comely castle, with tall red roofs and many bright windows, so that it seemed to King Arthur that it was a very fine castle indeed. And upon a smooth green lawn he perceived those three damoiselles clad in flame-colored satin, of whom the page of Sir Miles and Sir Griflet had spoken. And they played at ball with a golden ball, and the hair of each was of a hue of gold, and it seemed to King Arthur, as he drew nigh, that they were the most beautiful damoiselles that he had ever beheld in all of his life. Now as King Arthur came unto them, the three ceased tossing the ball, and she who was the fairest of all damoiselles demanded of him whither he went, and upon what errand he was bound. Then King Arthur made reply, "Ha, fair lady, whither should a belted knight ride upon such a day as this, and upon what business, other than the search of adventure, such as beseemeth a knight of a proper strength of heart and frame who would be errant?" Then the three damoiselles smiled upon the King, for he was exceedingly comely of face, and they liked him very well. "Alas, Sir Knight," said she who had before spoken, "I prithee be in no such haste to undertake a dangerous adventure, but rather tarry with us for a day or two or three, for to feast and make merry with us. For surely good cheer doth greatly enlarge the heart, and we would fain enjoy the company of so gallant a knight as thou appearest to be. Yonder castle is ours, and all this gay valley is ours, and those who have visited it are pleased, because of its joyousness, to call it the Valley of Delight. So tarry with us for a little, and be not in such haste to go forward." "Nay," said King Arthur, "I may not tarry with ye, fair ladies, for I am bent upon an adventure of which ye may wot right well, when I tell ye that I seek that Sable Knight who hath overcome so many other knights and hath taken away their shields. So I do pray ye of your grace for to tell me where I may find him." "Grace of Heaven!" cried she who spake for the others, "this is certainly a sorry adventure which ye seek, Sir Knight, for already in these 2 days have 2 knights assayed with that knight, and both have fallen into great pain and disregard. Ne'theless, an thou wilt undertake this peril, yet shalt thou not go until thou hast eaten and refreshed thyself." So saying, she lifted a little ivory whistle that hung from her neck by a chain of gold, and blew upon it very shrilly. In answer to this summons there came forth from the castle 3 fair young pages, clad all in flame-colored raiment, bearing among them a silver table covered with a white napkin. And after them came 5 other pages of the same appearance, bearing flagons of white wine and red, dried fruits and comfits, and manchets of white fair bread. Then King Arthur descended from his war horse with great gladness, for he was both hungry and athirst, and seating himself at the table with the damsels beside him, he ate with great enjoyment, discoursing pleasantly the while with those fair ladies, who listened to him with great cheerfulness of spirit. Yet he told them not who he was, though they greatly marvelled who might be the noble warrior who had come thus into that place. So having satisfied his hunger and his thirst, King Arthur mounted his steed again, and the 3 damsels conducted him across the valley a little way, he riding upon his horse and they walking beside him. So by and by he perceived where was a dark pathway that led into the farther side of the forest land. And when he had come thither, the lady who had addressed him before said to him, "Yonder is the way that thou must take an thou wouldst enter upon this adventure. So fare thee well, and may good hap go with thee, for certes thou art the knight most pleasant of address who hath come hitherward for this long time." Thereupon King Arthur, having saluted those ladies right courteously, rode away with very great joy of that pleasant adventure through which he had thus passed. Now when King Arthur had gone some ways, he came, by and by, to a certain place where charcoal burners plied their trade. For here were many mounds of earth, all a smoke with the smouldering logs within, whilst all the air was filled with the smell of the dampened fires. As the King approached this spot, he presently beheld that something was toward that was sadly amiss. For in the open clearing he beheld 3 sooty fellows with long knives in their hands, who pursued one old man whose beard was as white as snow. And he beheld that the reverend old man, who was clad richly in black, and whose horse stood at a little distance, was running hither and thither as though to escape from those wicked men, and he appeared to be very hard pressed and in great danger of his life. "Pardie," quoth the young King to himself, "here, certes, is one in sore need of succor." Whereupon he cried out in a great voice, "Hold, villains! What would you be at?" and therewith set spurs to his horse and dropped his spear into rest, and drove down upon them with a noise like to thunder for loudness. But when the three wicked fellows beheld the armed knight thus thundering down upon them, they straightway dropped their knives and with loud outcries of fear ran away hither and thither until they had escaped into the thickets of the forest, where one upon a horse might not hope to pursue them. Whereupon, having driven away those wicked fellows, King Arthur rode up to him whom he had succored, thinking to offer him condolence. And behold, when he had come nigh to him, he perceived that the old man was the enchanter Merlin. Yet whence he had so suddenly come, who had only a little while before been at the King's court at Carleon, and what he did in that place the King could in no wise understand. Wherefore he bespoke the enchanter in this wise: "Ha, Merlin, it seemeth to me that I have saved thy life. For surely thou hadst not escaped from the hands of those wicked men had I not happened to come hitherward at this time." "Dost thou think so, Lord?" said Merlin. "Now let me tell thee that I did maybe appear to be in danger, yet I might have saved myself very easily had I been of a mind to do so. But as thou sawst me in this seeming peril, so may thou know that a real peril, far greater than this, lieth before thee, and there will be no errant knight to succor thee from it. Wherefore I pray thee, Lord, for to take me with thee upon this adventure that thou art set upon, for I do tell thee that thou shalt certainly suffer great dole and pain therein." "Merlin," said King Arthur, "even an I were to face my death, yet would I not turn back from this adventure. But touching the advice thou givest me, meseems it will be very well to take thee with me, if such peril lieth before me as thou sayest." And Merlin said, "Yea, it would be very well for thee to do so." So Merlin mounted upon his palfrey, and King Arthur and he betook their way from that place in pursuit of that adventure which the King had undertaken to perform. End of Section 8